when MBA admissions committees let you into their program, it's not so much necessarily that they're looking for the people who will make the best students in the immediate term, but rather they're looking for who's going to make the best alumnus or alumna. Once a school lets you in and you graduate, your names are interlinked for the rest of your lives, right? Like there are marriages that don't last this long, right? So a school knows if they let you in and even 30 years later you get arrested for insider trading, you better believe that every article is going to say, a graduate of the Harvard Business School, was arrested today. If I see no evidence of altruism, and then a 4 or 5 year career with no, and then all of a sudden, like July of 2024, right? Like I suddenly signed up for 7 different things. To me, it's very obvious, and it's actually off-putting. I would almost rather that someone not suddenly like do a bunch of things at the last minute in the hopes that I'm going to fool them.
They notice everything, right? That's the admissions goal.
How can they make up for the lack of extracurriculars and community work?
Well, what are the personal qualities that admissions officers like to see through the volunteer work, right? I think effectively, if I had to boil it down to one word, it would be altruism. And so you can still demonstrate altruism even if you're working in private equity.
Hey, MBA hopefuls, we are live on the air with MBA Waves, talking all things business and education. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, which helps us continue to create all this free content. Today on episode 160, and the last episode of the year, we are bringing the focus on how extracurriculars matter in business school applications, what do business schools love about candidates, and how you can stand out in your round 2 applications. I'm your host for today, Krithika, joined by my co-hosts Eric and Bara. Hey, how are you guys?
Hey, everyone.
And like always, we have a special guest for you today, our friend and colleague, Maria Wich-Vila of Applicant Lab. A very warm, big welcome to you, Maria.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. It's so nice to see you guys again.
I know, and we're so on point with the theme. It's a holiday season, but we all know that it's a round 2 application season, which is one of the busiest times of the year. But here we are, giving back by sharing our expertise and time. So thanks so much for doing this, Maria. And just jumping right back in to the topic of today, we all know that the MBA applications is so numbers oriented, and we obsess with so many numbers: ROI, GMAT scores, your CGPA, your undergrad, laurels that you might have held, average work experience, so many numbers. And the question is like, why are the extracurricular activities or the community work experience and giving back still considered to be important?
I'll jump in if that's okay. So I think it's important.
Maria, you always have first crack.
I waited for 1 second and then I'm like, okay. Yeah. it's a lot of restraint for me, trust me. I think it's important, not just with the topic of community service, but with anything regarding the application, to take a step back and think about when MBA admissions committees let you into their program, it's not so much necessarily that they're looking for the people who will make the best students in the immediate term, but rather they're looking for who's going to make the best alumnus or alumna in the longer term, right? Who is going to graduate from the program, take the education and the experiences that they've gotten from the program, and go on to succeed in a variety of different facets of life. Ideally professionally. It is business school after all, and so they do want to see some evidence that you're going to be successful in something related to management and leadership. But the community service aspect can really point to a lot of positive attributes. That is to say, if a person is the sort of person who tends to get involved, who tends to volunteer, and by the way, there are lots of different things that can count as community engagement or community service, so we can get to that a little bit later. But if you're the sort of person who tends to step up and raise your hand and help out others, then that points to a positive future for you, whether it's in the corporate world where you are helping others in your future employer, or even just being an upstanding member of the community who is not going to the absolute worst case scenario that any school, like the worst thing they want is for someone to embarrass their program later on, right? For someone to perhaps be someone who is unethical and does something shady, and then they end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for all the wrong reasons. And so community service can serve a couple of things. It can help show that you are fundamentally someone who is geared towards giving back and helping others. And also, many times when people are working in very hierarchical companies or in organizations where maybe their day job does not allow them a lot of leeway to demonstrate leadership experience, volunteer activities can provide a valuable way to show that you have those leadership skills and those leadership abilities if maybe your day-to-day job doesn't allow that. So I have seen many cases where people, maybe just their work part of their resume is competitive, it's in line, but it doesn't necessarily stand out. And they say to me, but Maria, you don't understand, like my company, like every junior analyst, this is the job, right? We're not allowed to do all these amazing ideas. I'm not allowed to take the ideas that I have and implement them. But then in their extracurriculars, they are, leading a fundraiser for a local nonprofit. They're on the board of a local nonprofit. They're helping doing all sorts of things where they can show the admissions committees, look, even though my job has not given me a chance to demonstrate these skills and these attributes, I do have them. And here's the concrete proof. So that's my introductory spiel.
Really agree with you there, Maria. Definitely serve multiple purposes. Not like we do these things for the purpose of getting into an MBA. It's not such a transactional kind of thing. We do these things because they're important to us, because it resonates, or something that speaks to us. I think I would just add that it shows the admissions committees and your future employers what kind of person you are, right? That you are somebody who gives. It's not just all about you, just taking, but also specifically what your values are. Like what are some of the most important things to you? Like what kind of mark do you want to leave on this earth? Like, what do you want to be remembered for, right? Some of the things that really hit home. And I think that helps the school understand how you would fit within their community. Also taking into consideration the many clubs and student associations that exist, and how you would be an asset, right? You would bring some of that kind of like a social side leadership skills of whether, getting people together or organizing behind a cause or having that kind of impact in things that are not just about the bottom line or profits. So a lot of good stuff there.
It's interesting too, Maria, you just touched on it, but it's really been resonating for me, this whole idea of like, you don't want to get into the newspapers for bad things that you've done and then be associated with a school, right? And I've been watching, how are some of these universities handling some of the spotlight that they're getting when their alums are doing things that are not necessarily pro community, or it's like the antithesis of what we're talking about. And so it is important to think about, how are you presenting yourself? Even how are you presenting this on your social media, right? How are you presenting your volunteerism on your social media, right? It's interesting, but I've definitely been thinking a lot about politically people who have gone to these schools. How is it showing up when they've been doing things that are countercultural?
Right. Or even, because once a school lets you in and you graduate, your names are interlinked for the rest of your lives, right? Like there are marriages that don't last this long, right? So a school knows if they let you in and even 30 years later, you get arrested for insider trading, you better believe that every article is going to say, Maria Wich-Vila, hopefully not, a graduate of the Harvard Business School, was arrested today on insider. Like they know that the name of the school is going to come immediately after your name. And the journalists are actually going to love it, right? The fancier the school, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. The harder that fall from grace, the more the journalists are going to relish it. And so the schools, at a minimum, want to make sure that they can, while they can't obviously, they can't polygraph you, they do look for little bits of evidence that you are, an ethical person.
Right, and certainly where you volunteer and how you show up for that volunteering does, like you said, really indicate a lot of these different pieces. And you've got all of these other pieces, right? You've got your GMAT score, you've got your essays, you've got, if you interview, your application, your grades, all of that. So why do you think that, I mean, we've sort of talked about it, that that this is so important? Like, what kind of traits? I guess it's the soft skills, maybe, right? That come through as well as the leadership skills. Like, why is it so important to have this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, we live in an increasingly interconnected world, whether folks want that to be the case or not. It is the reality. And in an interconnected world, it behooves us, we can't do anything all by ourselves. The more complex businesses get, the more complex organizations get, the more complex the problems get that people are trying to solve, usually the more people you need to have work together to solve those problems. And usually, while someone could be sort of this harsh, dictatorial, screaming at everyone and throwing things type, increasingly that management style is proving to either be completely out of favor, that's another reason that people sometimes end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But even if you don't ever get sort of caught for being a bad boss, the results start to speak for themselves, right? People aren't going to want to work with you. People aren't going to want to help you out. And so to the extent that if you're in an organization that's trying to solve complicated problems, you're going to need lots of smart people helping you and helping each other. So at the very basics level, doing something for others shows that you have that sort of altruism that hopefully points to you in the future being the kind of person that others will say, hey, you know what? Bara and Eric and Krithika, they're all starting a startup together. And I have worked with them before and they're such good people. I will follow them to I am going to join that startup and we're going to make it happen, right? And so because of that, that's why the schools like to see that. Obviously, you can't just say in your essay, like, I'm a very nice person with excellent teamwork skills, right? Yikes. It's a lot better if you can prove it by showing that you have done altruistic things, hopefully having a history of it. Eric, one thing that you mentioned a second ago that I made a note of, you said, well, of course, we don't just do this to get into the MBA programs. And I want to highlight that point because I think sometimes people, not everyone, but every once in a while, someone does actually only start volunteering because they have been working for a few years and they start looking into the MBA admissions process. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to be doing community service and the applications are due in 3 months and I've never done anything. And then they sign up for 10 different activities. And I do want to caution, and Eric, I would, especially because you've worked sort of on the admission side in the past. I feel like at least when I see resumes where I see no community service, 4 years of college, no involvement with others. And again, we can talk in a minute about how community service can be very broadly defined, right? But if I see no evidence of altruism and then a 4 or 5 year career with no, and then all of a sudden July of 2024, right? I suddenly signed up for 7 different things. To me, it's very obvious and it's actually off-putting. I would almost rather that someone not suddenly pretend and put that, suddenly do a bunch of things at the last minute in the hopes that I'm going to fool them. They're not going to notice that I studied these 3 activities 2 months.
They notice everything, right? That's the admissions goal. They're good at their job. They can sense all sorts of things, and it just looks inauthentic, right? So on the other hand, Maria, if you had a client that threw on their CV 7 different things starting in July, the year that they're applying for MBAs, what would you advise them instead to do, perhaps?
I tell them to take it off. For me personally, it is so obvious. It's inauthentic. It's cringy. You're insulting the reader's intelligence. To your point, these people are pros when they work in admissions. They've been trained by others. There's a whole team. Most applications are going to get multiple reviews. It's not just you have to fool one person and then you're in, right? There are lots of people who are going to review. And so within that, it actually leaves a bad taste in the mouth. I think it actually hurts. Again, personally, I would rather that someone just be like, you know what? I've been working in investment banking. I'm a good person. I just haven't had time for this. Maybe you show that altruism in other ways. You've mentored a junior analyst who joined the program and was struggling with their lookup tables in Excel. And you can still show other ways that you're a good person without necessarily having to formally volunteer. But to me, if it's so inauthentic and so obvious, I would rather just don't even put it personally. That's just my take on it.
So
and
building
Maria,
I'm sorry, Krithika, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to quickly point out one thing in terms of just to clarify what you're saying is that if it's a very short duration or even if it's just for a day or something, you don't want it there, right? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's my, if you can't link it to something else. So for example, if let's take something like the Humane Society, right? Working with animals. I know, Bara, you're a huge animal lover. So let's say somebody, maybe in college, they did a few fundraisers and then they volunteered for PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And then they later on did a couple of days at a shelter for dogs and cats. At least there's sort of like a theme there that you can link them all together. And what I would do in a case like that is I would put like an umbrella that says something like animal rights / humane treatment of animals. And then I would kind of put them with maybe a list with some commas, like I did this and then I did this and then I did this. So then that way, at least you're showing, look, this is genuine. Maybe I haven't been able to be consistently involved over the past several years. Totally understandable. Life happens. I can tell you guys a little bit about, my volunteer experience prior to business school. But at least it's important if you have at least a history of it, even if it's kind of these breadcrumbs from the past and not a continuous line, at least you can link those breadcrumbs together to show genuine commitment to that.
Yeah, the personal becomes professional, right? So like there's things we make some personal choices, like with animal rescue, let's say. Like it could be that you rescued a couple dogs, you grew up with these rescue dogs, and then later on you did a couple things and then that parlayed into something else. But there could be that timeline, right? Even if it is breadcrumbs, like you said.
Yeah. I think what I wouldn't do is all of a sudden like show up once for one day thing and then put it on my application personally.
So Maria, building on that, like how can you prevent from falling into that trap of tokenism, right? Kind of just doing it for the symbolic gesture without actually creating impact? What would be some advice you would give?
I mean, my advice would be, especially if you're about to apply. We're recording this about a week or two before, a couple weeks before the upcoming deadline, so it might be a little too late for anyone watching right now. But for anyone who's applying in another year or two, start to create those breadcrumbs. And what I would say is ask yourself, like when you read an article in the news or when you see a headline about a certain cause, what are the ones that really draw you in, right? Maybe it's animal rights, maybe it's the environment, maybe it's providing affordable medical care for people. Like whatever it is, there's the good news is, the bad news is there's no shortage of problems in this world that need volunteers, but the good news is there's no shortage of problems in this world that need volunteers, right? And so that there are so many different ways that you can contribute. What I would say is sort of, check in with your gut. Like when you read an article, when you see the headline, what are those issues that really make you say, man, I wish someone should really do something about that. That might be your first guidepost that this is a genuine interest for you. Because if it is a genuine interest, not only are you going to start developing those breadcrumbs almost despite yourself, right? Without even thinking about it, but you're going to be more passionate and more involved. And you're therefore going to be more likely to take on that leadership role, right? If you're really committed to a certain cause, and let's say you join the local board of a local nonprofit related to that cause, if you're really, truly passionate about it, you are going to step up. You are going to say, maybe we should do a silent auction. Maybe we should try to do some sort of fundraising gala. Maybe we should do, you're naturally going to take on those leadership roles, that's the ultimate good thing, the ultimate thing an extracurricular activity could do for your business school application is give you another opportunity to demonstrate that leadership. You're more likely to do it if you actually care about the topic.
100%. And like, even if you're like at say 50% of being interested or caring about it, if you do get in touch with them, you're going to learn more about it. You're going to hear some specific examples that'll probably draw you in even more. And I think that's kind of how you spark that flame, right? It becomes authentic. I think the message really is start early. Like anything, whether it's the MBA research, the GMAT prep, whatever it may be. I mean, this is a journey, right? Figuring out the best place for you to be, the best school, I'm trying to say, the best program for you, and getting in, right? So the earlier you can start. And if you are applying this year and you are lacking in that area, don't be inauthentic. I think that message is clear, especially from Maria, about like, rather not see it at all than like an obvious kind of faking it kind of thing. And look, if the schools that you're applying to, if that ends up being something really important and you don't get admitted, then maybe all the more reason to get started now for next year. If we can try a reapplication. And I just want to also make the point that when I've spoken to admissions directors at pretty much every school out there, they love reapplicants. They love to see that people are still really excited, passionate, and motivated, and they're going to work hard and improve their application and try again next year anyway. And I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind. If you're worried about like, oh, maybe I shouldn't apply this year because they'll see that I didn't get in, and next year, yeah, they're going to see. But then, you try again. So, okay, let's get into the weeds a little bit more.
I was also going to say something about just piggybacking on this, where let's say that you've got a certain talent or you have a certain skill set that you can bring those, like you might not be able to do those on the job, but you can bring them to the volunteer experience. So like I know, for example, there was a while that I was doing graphic design for National Organization of Women, right? And so like I didn't just want to protest. I wanted to actually contribute in a way that maybe someone else couldn't, right? Like, so what is it that you can bring to the particular field? Let's say that you're really great in accounting, even though you're not doing accounting in your job. Like going in and fixing the books of a nonprofit that you feel really strongly about is basically giving them a leg up, right? So think about how you show up to each of these things. Like you don't have to you want to be a leader, but that doesn't mean that you have to be like leading things directly in a way that we think of as leadership. It could be that you're contributing, and those contributions can really make a big difference.
And Bara, that's a great point, because there are a couple of places where your volunteering or your altruism might show up within your business school application. One of the most basic ways is, look, if you've got a great leadership story, you weave it into one of your broader leadership essays. But a lot of schools will often ask questions like, how do you plan to contribute to our community? And that doesn't necessarily always, there can only be one, sometimes some of these clubs have like 5 co-presidents, but there can only be sort of one president of the club, but the clubs need lots of other people, right? The club is going to need a graphic designer. Let's say the club, it's the marketing association, and they put on an annual conference. They're going to need a graphic designer to put together the social media banners for the conference. They're going to need an accountant or someone with those bookkeeping skills to say, okay, we've got 10 people to sign up for the conference, and this is where the expenses are. Even if it's something fun like music, many schools have follies or theatrical performances or a cappella groups. And while that might not be quite as impactful to the community as taking over being the student body president for the MBA students, it does contribute to the community, right? To be able to put on these concerts. For example, my husband was the co-president of the Entertainment and Media Club, but he also was the music director of the a cappella group at his school, and they would put on concerts and everyone would come and cheer, and it was great. So all these little things can also point to these sort of hobbies that you have, which is, something that I've touched upon before, and I can dig into that more now. Community involvement, we all immediately sort of think of like, oh, I volunteered at Habitat for Humanity, or I tutored a child. Yes, those are all fantastic, but it can also be smaller examples of altruism, like helping out a struggling coworker at work, or it can be a hobby that can in some way enrich the community, even if that enrichment is happening through entertainment or through helping a club achieve a broader goal in an indirect way. So that can also be something to think about. That can be another reason, if we haven't already convinced you, Mr. or Ms. applicant watching this, if we haven't already convinced you to start to get involved, hopefully this is yet another reason that you can then say, well, I'm also going to bring this to the community. You can sort of pretzel it around and say, well, because I was creating graphics for the National Organization of Women, when I joined the Women's Association at Wharton, I will also, create banners and posters for our events to draw people to them. So,
right. And you can even go the other way and say, wow, I'm really good at math, so why don't I mentor someone in the community? Maybe there's a whole bunch of kids in the community, and that this is a life skill, like, balancing their checkbook, that I can help them with.
Absolutely. Or it might even be other first-year students. If you're like, say, an accounting or finance whiz, and there's someone coming in from a non-traditional background who's never used Excel a day in their life, and thinks a balance sheet is like the Olympic gymnastics event, you can totally help your classmates too. You can, if you have a history of tutoring, say, junior accountants at your firm or junior bankers at your firm, now you can say, well, I'll also continue to do that with any of my classmates who might be completely new to some of these topics.
Maybe supporting your fellow students in the batch. I'm not sure how many people have a checkbook these days, but Excel is very useful.
I have a checkbook.
So I was about to say that, how all of this ties so well into leadership. Because as a leader, you care, as a leader, you teach, as a leader, you ensure that the other people are protected and, of course, are invested to follow and so on. So all of these things just point out to just probably like gathering those skills along the way. And often, and Maria, I think you spoke about this a little bit before, but I just wanted to deep dive into it. You said that some applicants who come from some overrepresented pools, and we know that these are industries which are really, really known for making people work really long hours. How can they make up for the lack of extracurriculars and community work? Because we know that something like suddenly appearing like a ship on a radar or something, a volunteer activity out of nowhere, is going to literally like throw up a red signal. But then they were like really slogging it out with the 60-hour weeks. So how can they now substitute for the lack of it, these kind of other experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we think about, what are the personal qualities that admissions officers like to see through the volunteer work, right? I think effectively, if I had to boil it down to one word, it would be altruism. And so you can still demonstrate altruism even if you're working in private equity, right? I mean, the portfolio companies might not think so, but your coworkers, you can absolutely, why not mentor that struggling analyst under your wing, right? Why not, put together a women's support group, right? If you're in an office environment where maybe you're a member of a certain community that has often been marginalized, right? Why not put together events for that community to come together and exchange tips on how to not be so marginalized, how to get that respect at work. There's so many different ways that you can do this, and I think the way on a pragmatic level where you demonstrate that in your application, because it's a little bit weird to be like, I'm so nice. Look at how nice I am. I helped these people. This person was a real dummy, and boy, oh boy, did I help them out. That's a little awkward. But your recommender, this is where your recommenders can really come in and say things like, we are in a cutthroat, management consulting, McKinsey, we are an upper out in our firm. And so there's a lot of competition. And yet, she helped that other analyst, even though they were both up for the same promotion to that next level, right? She's the person that everyone knows, like, look, if someone on the team is struggling with how to put together those presentations, man, send them to her, because she's going to be the one who is kind and who helps, even when it does not benefit her to help. If your recommender can tell those stories about you, then that helps show that even though the logistical constraints of your life have limited you, you still at your core have those qualities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Maria. And the way we do, there's this idea of like the way that we do some things or the way that we do all things, right?
Yeah.
And so schools are going to look at that also. I would love to hear some success stories from the three of you. Like, what are some success stories that are common or uncommon community work or volunteering that you've come across as you met with applicants?
Well, I was actually going to tell a story that I just experienced yesterday. I was visiting a friend in the hospital, a good friend, Rachel, who is just this like superstar. And I was like trying to cheer her up, and I brought her some nail polish. That's why I had my nails all these colors. She wanted purple. So I was like, all right, let's go purple. And so I went to visit her at this hospital. And while we were getting food at the CAF, there was some people looked like they were about in their 20s or 30s, like talking to a lot of people, asking questions and so on. And they came up to us, they were asking some questions about our experience and so on. I was like, what is this about? And actually they were MBA students at one of the very well-known business schools here in Paris. And they were doing some community work. It was some kind of arrangement. They had the agreement of the hospital, but they're trying to improve patient experience and the family's experience. It's like kind of going along with the idea that it takes a whole family to heal the patient, especially with some of the extreme illnesses. And so I thought that was really cool. And I was like, well, why do you do this? Because they don't even come from here. I mean, a lot of them actually said they want to work in the healthcare industry, but they also kind of really like hammered down on the point about how it's important to think locally as well and like support the people who are in your local community, not just on a global scale. And I thought that was really cool. That despite being an MBA student, super busy with, classes, group projects, this and that, this is part of one of the student clubs they were in. And I was like, that's excellent. So, yeah, it wasn't really an admission story, but more of a current student kind of maintaining that. And that's when you see it's authentic, right? If they've talked about it in their application, it's going right on through their MBA, despite all the challenges of being an MBA student, and contributing to that community, which is exactly what schools want to see. I think when I think of especially Columbia, they think about their student associations as like one of the most important resources, along with the classes that it's like higher level learning, you're putting into action stuff and you're interacting and networking and doing things and so on. It's much more the practical side of the program versus the classroom. So
any other success stories or interesting?
Yeah. After you, Maria.
Oh yeah. I mean, gosh, I've got a bunch. I mean, there was one that I mentioned before of someone who was like at a very large feeder firm where, it's like the constraints around like you are an analyst and this is what your job is and this is what your job isn't. So we're not going to let you come up with stay in your lane, right? But yet this person joined a local nonprofit, ended up being on the board of it, suggested a brand new fundraiser activity that ended up like doubling the amount of money that they were able to raise. It was a modest amount, but still doubling is doubling. And so because of that, I think that this helped this candidate get into a higher tier of school because everyone else from their firm was applying with roughly, at a certain point, certain management consultants or certain banking analysts or whatever, all those resumes really do start to look alike and, they start to swim together. But so this person was able to elevate themselves above their peers in the applicant pool from that company because they had like this extra, this really good story about that. Another case is, for example, someone, let's say at an investment bank, got heavily involved in one of the employee resource groups and as a result was able to work with one of the senior partners who was also a member of that community. And because of that partner ended up, in this case, the volunteering itself was not the thing that made a difference, but because they got exposure to this VIP within the company, that VIP then ended up taking her under his wing and giving her these really cool assignments in the following year or two leading up to her application. Again, it's not why she did it, but it sure didn't hurt that it gave her exposure to someone senior in the organization that she would not have otherwise gotten to really talk to. So I think those are the sorts of things that most come to mind.
And I want to tell about MBA alum story, and this is very recent, happened in the last 15 days. So, and actually I think the origin of it started a little earlier, but there is this person who just saw the state of the footpaths in Bangalore and decided like, oh, we need to do something about it. But they did it in such a way that it brought momentum from the government, the people who clean up the streets regularly, from the CSR wings of the various different big companies around here, the tech parks, and the citizens. So in the last 13 days, we pounded the footpaths of Bangalore for 100 kilometers and 1,200 participants with 10 kilometers per day basis and all over footpaths, which people thought was impossible. And every time they would say the footpaths are dirty and they're not there, they're non-existent, what civic infrastructure. So instead of being somebody who complains about the problem, they took one small step. They said like, look, I'm going to take a walk, I'm going to take a run, and I'm going to photograph the areas where the footpath is non-existent. And it's such a small thing. Like I'm gonna take 10,000 steps on my way, and this is my exercise of the day. But I'm gonna just like also take care of this. So one thing I want to point out to anybody out there is, it can be anything that you're passionate about. It can be at work. It can be in your community. It can be in your the streets behind you. It doesn't matter. It's just that you have to care about something deep enough. Such that, and it could be a very small step. So this was a very small step. Somebody decided that, hey, this was bad. and they enlisted support, and within such a small short time frame. And of course, this is exactly what MBA would give you, because they also had the skills to persuade about like 1,500 people to come and join them in this course. So I want to say that as an alum, so they were giving back not only to their, I'm sure that everybody would love to like get a piece of them now, because to say, hey, this person came from our institution and this person belonged to us and so on. But I just want to point out that it can start with something super small, and all it needs is just your ability to just give it to the cause whichever matters to you, to care deep enough. And it doesn't matter, like it can be anything from hip hop. I do have somebody who had a hip hop club in a really like this is a straight jacketed firm, so to say. So a hip hop club which is like completely unknown of, because the average age of people working there was about 35. And so this person went in and started it. So I just want to say that it can be anything, and have fun with it while you're doing it. But you can start small, and that can really like create a ripple effect and lead to something. And of course, like as every business school wants, create that impact.
And what I love about the hip hop club example is that you might think like, well, it's a hip hop, like this isn't like volunteering has to be about saving the world and say, but even something as that might initially sound sort of modest, like a hip hop club. Think of, you're building community with if it was at work, you're building community with your coworkers, you're helping them be healthier, you're helping build bonds with others. Like, again, it shows that you're not just thinking about yourself, because then that person would just go and do hip hop by themselves someplace. But the fact that they wanted to share this passion that they had with other people, I mean, it really does indirectly point to so many positive qualities about this person. And I think that that's terrific. And it's a great example, because it shows that it can be so many different things, right?
Yeah, and not to like mention, matching all the schedules of people.
That's 90% of it right there.
The other thing that, Maria, you just touched on that I do want to just cause a little bit of attention to be put on it, is that when you're working for an organization, whether it is Habitat for Humanity or the Hip Hop Club, there might be a board, right? There's going to be people that are also volunteering, that at different levels, and that you really your networking winds up really getting more expansive, or has the potential to expand. So you might not even think about it as a perk, but let's say you're working like Chess in the Schools, right? There's a whole apparatus of board members that also might be really great for you to meet. And they also have a passion for what they're doing. So when you're around other people who are equally passionate and who are also in different industries, it just allows for like a cross-hatching of some sort, and a networking that I think is really valuable in these communities.
Maria, as someone who's graduated from HBS, I wanted to ask about how is the attitude, but about giving back and how does that help in the MBA classroom. But just stepping back a second, like as an American living abroad, right? I've been living in France for 14 years, before that Spain, and there's a difference in the culture of charity, community service, donations, all that kind of stuff. I've heard Americans referred to as the most generous people, but maybe it's because like our healthcare system doesn't necessarily provide things for as many people, or there's more of a social safety net in a lot of these European countries, and Japan, Australia as well. So there's a different culture surrounding it, which I would say, living here for so long, I see like it's maybe a little bit more important in North America, let's say a little bit more broadly speaking, North American schools, if you're applying to MBA programs in North America, that having that community service dimension is a little bit even more important than if it were in other parts of the world. That said, I wonder if you have an opinion about certain schools in North America or outside that you think are particularly important that you demonstrate this community service dimension to your profile.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, for anyone who might be watching this from a culture, from a country where that community service aspect is not so prevalent, it's not hammered into your head from a young age that it's important to volunteer, I wouldn't necessarily panic. I do think that it can be good for all the reasons we've described up until now, but I also think it's not make or break. At the end of the day, it is business school, and so your professional accomplishments are going to hold the most amount of weight in terms of really showing that you've got those leadership skills. So if you have been really focused on your career and you've been doing a great job in it, and maybe you're like, oh, we don't do this volunteer stuff because right, we have a social safety net, like right, we don't need it. I don't necessarily panic or feel that all is lost. I think that admissions committees understand that certain jobs don't provide that amount of time. Certain cultures, it's just not as important, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in terms of which schools do I think will be the ones where this matters the most, I think any school, I think it matters. It's a nice thing. No one wants to, I don't think there's any school out there that's like, we don't care if you're evil, just make us money. Although now that I think about it, but I would say, I think that the school, especially the schools that are smaller, that tend to be kind of in less urban locations, those are the ones that I think, for example, a Tuck at Dartmouth, where you're in Hanover, New Hampshire, you're about 3 hours away from Boston. And so if you go to a place like Tuck, part of the reason why Tuck is so famous is its alumni community is incredibly close-knit, probably the most close-knit of any school. And part of the reason for that is that you're all in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is a beautiful town, but a small town in New Hampshire, and you're kind of stuck there. Versus if you go to school in a big city, yeah, you can go to school during the week and then on the weekends, like, not see a single classmate because there are so many other things to do in that city. There are so many other social groups you could hang out with. And so at the schools where, let's say it's a college town. I would also say Michigan Ross, Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor's a huge, it's one of the biggest college towns, but it is still nonetheless a college town. A Darden or a Duke or a UNC, any of those schools that are located in quote unquote college towns, I think would want to see that even more so, because that building that sense of community amongst the students that they do let in is going to be extra important, because you're going to be spending so much more time together than you might if you attend a school that's in a larger urban environment.
What about Stanford? I mean, when I think about their famous essay question, what matters to you in most? I mean, they've had this, I don't know how many years now they've had this question. I think that's just like hits home right away with that values question.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, Stanford, yeah, that question has been around, I think since even I applied, which was 20 some years. It was only 2 years ago that I applied for my, no. It's been decades that's been their question. And remember, the Stanford Business School's motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. This is not a school for bystanders, right? This is not a school that, someone who's passive and sort of coasts along and doesn't really raise their hand, who sort of does the bare minimum. Like, those folks are not going to meet with success in the Stanford admissions process. And a lot of times, how do you start to change the world? It seems really lofty, but Krithika's example of the footpaths in Bangalore is a perfect example. Sometimes I do tell people, like, look, here's some of the types of people who do get into Stanford, and maybe they convinced, one example that comes to mind is a young person who convinced her government in a smaller country to set up a fund to support female entrepreneurs. And once I was giving a webinar, and someone in the chat of the webinar was like, that can't possibly be a real example. Like, there's no way that a 27-year-old convinced her government to set up. And I'm like, but it is happen. It is a true story. I don't know why I would make up a story. It's a true story. It's a real person. That person actually got into Stanford, because you're more powerful than you think, especially if you know how to motivate others, how to inspire others, all those things that the person with the footpaths in Bangalore was able to do to convince people to show up. You can apply that in so many different ways. And so for a Stanford, you're right, Eric. Stanford, it is about the community, but I think Stanford, it's a higher bar. Everything at Stanford's a higher bar. And I think community service may be one of those things where, the sort of standard tutoring other kids is nice, but they're really gonna be wowed by someone who has started taking steps to quote unquote change the world, even if it's a small corner of the world. Demonstrating that you have that not only the altruism, but also the ability to make that impact and influence, that's absolutely something that they're going to want to see.
Definitely. Let's bring it back to home. Like I was asking you about your particular experience. Sorry, I think that was you speaking at Harvard. Same question, like pivoting from Stanford to Harvard, right? And your direct experience there. What would you say about their views on?
Yeah, I don't think it's make or break. I don't think it's make or break for any of the schools. Again, if somebody, if unfortunately, if their career has been sort of lackluster, they haven't really accomplished a whole lot, they're in a stagnant career, the volunteering might help, but it's not going to be enough to overcome. It's similar to having like a perfect GMAT score, right? If someone has like a perfect GMAT score, but really nothing else really matches what the school is looking for, it's not going to be enough to get in. And so I think, a lot of my classmates at HBS had done significant volunteer work, and some of them had done nothing, but they were frankly super accomplished. And again, at the end of the day, it's business. It's a business school, and they had these amazing business careers. And so it's, again, I don't think it's made. It's I would be lying if I said, like, yes, if you go to any MBA program in the world, in the US, 100% of the students will have all done. No, that's not true. It's sort of a nice to have that can certainly help them feel better about you, but by itself, it's not going to be.
This is one of those things, if you're like on the edge, you're on the cusp of admission or not, and that could be one of those things that helps put you over to the right side of an answer from the outcome.
Yeah, no, exactly. If you are one of the 3 billion zillion, Accenture, Ernst & Young, Deloitte consultants out there who are applying, and all of you have 4 years of experience, and all of you have the same client stories, it's certainly, it can certainly help. So, but yeah, I'd also, it wouldn't be true for me to say, like, yes, everyone at HBS, they were all volunteering every Saturday. Many of them were there to make money, and they have, and good, they're very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
You've all talked about like these individual cases and success stories, whether it's the Bangalore footsteps, or Eric, you were talking about these medical students. I'm not the business school students at the medical facility, but I'm curious if there's other instances that you can talk about that will give the greatest value to business school students for growth and networking during their MBA. Do you have any sense of during their program itself, what would be good community service for folks to be doing?
I mean, for me, the biggest bang for your buck is to get really involved in the professional club that is related to whatever your career interest is. So if you want to work in real estate, join the real estate club. Don't just join it, like lead it, put together the conference, meet the speakers, organize the happy hours. That's going to be, honestly, the biggest bang for your buck. You're not only helping other people, but there's also pretty, bluntly, there's a really big benefit to you, because then if you graduate and then you enter that field, whatever it may be, and you've developed really strong bonds with the other graduates from your program who are also in that same industry, those are going to be folks that you are, decades into the future. I mean, before business school, I was in the entertainment industry, as was my husband. We met through the Entertainment and Media Club. And to this day, like his closest friend, like we live in Los Angeles. He continues to work in entertainment. I clearly don't. But all of our friends, like all of his friends from the Entertainment and Media Club, many of them are still working in entertainment, and they have all risen through the ranks. And as they rise through the ranks together, they're people in your field. So that's the biggest bang for your buck. If whatever it is that whatever industry it is, or industries that you've narrowed down that you think you want to enter, get involved with that professional club. That's going to have the biggest professional rewards for you. And then similarly, if you have a certain identity, right? If you're a woman, if you're LGBTQ, if you're Asian American, African American, Latino American, whatever it might be, joining those clubs may not provide necessarily quite the huge professional, tangible professional boost, but it is going to provide a support system for you, just a chance to be around, people who might be going through or experiencing similar things to you. And so from an emotional support perspective, that would be sort of the second type of club that I would prioritize, some sort of identity or cultural club.
I like that you added that, because I was like, yes, the professional club that relates to your future career, that is not the low-hanging fruit, but the obvious choice with multiple benefits. It's like the professional network that you're going to be part of and could lead to a job. And yes, and I wanted to say yes, and you brought up the kind of identity category of a club or organization. And to add a third, like a personal interest one. Like, I think, the professional one is the obvious choice, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. And like, get to meet people that relate to you, people that are different from you. Also, like Bara was talking about earlier, getting to use perhaps a skill set that you don't get to use in your career. You get to maybe do a bit of graphic design for the African American club, whatever, So yeah, diversify a bit, and it makes you more of an interesting person. And you don't just have one network.
Yeah.
So excellent.
Are there any last parting words at all for round 2 aspirants who are putting the finishing touches on their applications? Like, you made it really clear, like, you don't want to like join 7 committees now, before your applications are due. But are there any parting words that would give anyone the edge?
Well, I'd say whether you're working with a consultant or not on your applications and essays, and you've gotten everything, finalized and polished, and you're really confident and happy with it. Now it's just a couple of days before the application, and then you get your friend who's an alum from this school from 10 years ago, or somebody who works at the company that you're targeting, but maybe, I don't know, and they say, I wouldn't say that, you should say this, and then you start doubting everything, right? You go through this like paranoid mode, and you start like changing everything you just spent months working on, and now you have a last minute thrown together version of an essay that is not necessarily the best version. And look, let me just say, if you have a friend that's an alum, that's amazing, but they also are not you. They went to the program or the school at a different time, where there may be different policies or things in place that, they're maybe looking for different profiles. They have a different story. It's not your story. And these schools are not looking for cookie cutter models. So like, again, their story is not your story. And so try not to be influenced. I know it's a very high stakes moment, but don't undercut the work that you've done, whether totally on your own or you've had the guidance and advice of a consultant. Once you get to the end of the line, like, submit, be confident what you've done.
Eric, you just spoke for all of us.
Yeah, too many cooks in the kitchen ruin it. They destroy it. And the other thing I would add, by the way, is not only did your friend who went to that school apply at a different time, blah, 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 but like sometimes people get in despite their essays, right? Sometimes their accomplishments are just so, when you read that resume or you read that employment section, you're like, wow, I'm so wowed by this person. Maybe their essays were garbage, but it doesn't matter because, again, it's business school. And so if the accomplishments are there, you're at least going to get to the interview phase, probably, right? And so just because your friend's like, well, I got into this school and here's what I wrote for my essay. It might have been a terrific essay, but they might have also gotten in despite their essay. And so like, okay, God, this essay is so cringy, but we can't ignore the accomplishments, right? We're still going to bring them into interview. So just be aware of that as well, that, if you're going to get advice, try to get advice from someone who is experienced, or at least, if it's someone at work, for example, have it be someone who has worked with other people at your office who have also gone on to business school, for example. So at least they have a data set of more than one, a sample size greater than one to base their advice off of.
Wonderful. So we're coming to the close of our session, Maria. And I think to sum up what you said, raise your hand often and regularly, and then don't be a Grinch. And of course, contribute wherever you can and have fun while you're at it. So that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our featured guest and dear friend Maria for her lovely insights, and of course, our dear co-hosts, Bara and Eric. If you like today's episode, please give us a little thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves to stay on top of all the latest trends and news in the world of MBA's business and education. Do head to mbawaves.com for full access to upcoming and past episodes. And happy holidays, everybody. Good luck on round 2. We will catch you on the other side of in the next new year with a lot more fun stuff. Till then, hang in there and you got this. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Best of luck.
Bye.
Happy holidays.